Welcome to Chris and Jen in the morning.
Where it's always morning somewhere. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jen. And we're excited to have you with us today. What do we have on the list to talk about today, Chris?
Well, you have this topic of water, and I'm interested to hear, why are we talking about water?
Water is important. It makes up 80% of your body. Don't quote me on that. I don't actually have the facts of how much percentage, but it's like an enormous percentage of what is in your body is water, right? It's important.
I'm going to say it's probably more around 60.
Oh, I don't know. We'll fact check that. But I do have some great facts already prepared about water. Because one of the things that I have been trying to do to take better care of myself is drink enough water. And I have a few questions about water that, as we talk about how do you drink enough water, how do you hydrate enough, the question is how much water should you be drinking? There's all these different kinds of waters, like alkaline water, and, what about electrolyte drinks, and what's the deal on, do you just drink tap water? What do you do? So I did a little bit of fact finding to educate myself on water. And let me just tell you, first of all, jury's still out on some of these topics. Depends on the source, what the advice is. But when thinking about how much water you should drink, so there's the old adage of 8-ounce glasses of water a day, which for those of you who are not mathematicians, that's 64 ounces of water a day. That's probably not the right number because it's well below all of the calculations and averages. I did find on the National Center of Aging Adults,
a website I've not had to frequent.
National Center for Aging, National Center on Aging is the official. They suggested you drink 1/3 of your weight in ounces. So as you get older, maybe they think you're less active, and you just take your body weight in pounds and you divide that by 1/3, and then you drink that many ounces of water. Then there's the, kind of Mayo Clinic and Harvard Health publication have said, both in answer to the question, how much water should you drink? It depends, and you should talk to your doctor, and it's personal. Depends on your situation.
I love a good vague answer like that.
Right. They say, in general, adult females should drink 92 ounces of water a day. Oh, I'm sorry, 92 ounces of fluids a day. We'll get to that in a minute. And males should drink 124 ounces. Should intake 124 ounces a day.
Well,
in
I'm
general.
Failing there.
So if you think about the average weight for a male and a female, that's probably a calculation that's a little bit different than your average 1/3 of body weight. So they both acknowledge that it's personal and you should ask your doctor. But they do say things like the kinds of medication you take, such as even heart medication, if you are taking any kind of fiber supplements, how much caffeine you drink, which actually is another sort of myth that was busted in some of this research. But if you're drinking more than on average 4 cups, actual cups, not U.S. coffee mug cups, so not 4 of these. This is probably 2 cups. But if you drink more than 4 portion cups of coffee a day, then you do start having to drink more water to counterbalance the caffeine. But really, otherwise, drinking just a regular amount of coffee you don't actually have to drink more water because of that caffeine intake. Um, it also was interesting that it said that the research said if you drink um, alcohol, you don't necessarily have to add more um, fluid intake. And if you have like just one alcohol beverage, that counts towards your fluid intake, just like coffee
Oh,
does.
okay.
So
So it's not
caffeinated
working against
beverages,
you.
yeah, it actually counts towards your number of ounces that you need, which is interesting.
That is
Maybe that's
interesting.
maybe that's why the difference between 64 fluid ounces and 92 or 124 respectively. They also have said that about 20% of your daily intake of fluid ounces needed can come from food.
That's not surprising. I can see that.
Yeah. Like what kinds of food do you eat that you think might count towards water
Fruits,
intake?
vegetables, I'm guessing like some types of proteins as well will have
Oh,
some type of.
they didn't talk about protein, but they did talk about cucumber, celery, strawberries, grapefruit, spinach, watermelon, soups, broths.
Oh yeah, yeah, soups and broths. They've
If
got.
you have a beer, if you
I
if
would
you're
not.
like if you're getting drunk, probably you need to be drinking water to flush that out of your system. But if you have a beer, that actually could count towards your fluid ounces intake. Um, so interesting. It's really interesting. It was interesting. So the question of how much water should I be drinking a day is still, I am not certain. Depends. Ask your doctor.
It's very personal to you and your
And
doctor.
I'm sure if I go in to see my doctor and tell him I have been Googling about this, he's just going to roll his eyes in a very kind way because he's a great doctor. But he thinks that I Google far too many health related things.
But I could see
Uh,
that. That would not be
and then he'll
surprising.
print out some piece of paper and hand it to me. And it'll probably say at the bottom, ask your doctor. So,
Right.
um,
Exactly.
um, so the other thing that one of the other questions that I was sort of searching about is like, what about all the different kinds of water? Is there like, should I just be drinking plain old water or like what do you drink any of the like do you just drink plain water or do you like
Um.
participate in any of these other kinds of water?
So we use a Brita filter for our tap water. So we that's how we like I don't know, like filter
You
our
have that
water.
good New York City water.
It's
It's
true.
like the
They do
best.
say that's why we have good bagels and pizza crust.
It's like known as the best water out there. Um, so one of the popular trends has been alkaline
Mm-hmm.
water. Like you probably see that when you go into, the convenience store and you look at water. There's like water, and then there's, here's alkaline water. And then there's all of these different, like this water is this pH and that pH and this pH. And so I was going, oh, like should I be paying attention to the pH of the water that I'm drinking? Is that like why I'm feeling dehydrated? Honestly, I probably feel thirsty because I'm not drinking
Enough water.
nearly enough water. uh, but Harvard Health Publication actually had an article where they talked about this, and they said actually because the fluid in your stomach is so acidic, once regular or alkaline water gets down into your stomach where it gets processed, there will be very little difference in the resulting stomach fluid pH. So, like before it even gets into your bloodstream, like the
It's gonna
contents
be
of your stomach
neutralized.
just do what they're supposed to do and pH balances yourself. It also talked about if it does get into your bloodstream because you drink a ton of alkaline water in a really fast period of time, uh it might slightly raise the pH of your blood, but your kidneys would work really quickly to go into action and rebalance your blood pH. So, unless you've got some kind of something going on where your kidneys don't work properly, um, it probably actually has no impact on you. So don't pay, double the price for a bottle of
It's
alkaline
all a
water.
gimmick to try and get people to pay more money for water.
I mean, maybe if that's what you need to do to get yourself to drink more water, is this good to drink the water, but it's no better for you than regular water.
Yeah. I feel like Frank looked into this a while ago, as we were traveling, and usually that's when we'll get bottles of water for like our hotel rooms and for the cars that we're in, things like that. And I remember him saying something around like glacier water, like that's the like finding like natural spring water, stuff like that is he found something that said like the minerals and stuff that come from it are more natural and like it's better than these other alkaline infused or all the other
Hy-
gimmicky waters.
Hyper clean water. I
Yeah.
think after the kind of internet searching that I did and the articles kind of not giving direct advice, they said this is something that needs to be studied further. And I tried to go with like, medical review articles as opposed to like Culligan.com. um, they may be a little, I mean, I'm not saying that they wouldn't give you honest advice, but they may have some skin in that game.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
just a little.
but all of the like health related organizations, the articles that I could find were, there's nothing, no study has really proven that any of these types of water actually like make a difference.
For
Just
anything.
just drink water. If the water
Yeah.
is safe for drinking, if it is safe drinking water, which is, what you're getting, then just drink the water. Um, I think if drinking filtered water helps you drink more water because you like the taste better, then drink filtered water. If you can't afford to drink filtered water and you're just drinking tap water, like the tap water is deemed safe for drinking, unless you're
Exactly.
somewhere where they say don't drink the water.
Right. Unless there's a notice out, in which case follow your local healthcare or your health organization's
Yeah.
guidance.
The one other thing that I read is how fast you drink the water matters. So if you're drinking, 96 or 124 fluid ounces of water a day, but you do it like all at once or in big amounts at a time, your body actually doesn't ingest and process the water through to all of your cells and organs. And it just kind of runs right through you. So it's important to be constantly drinking the water all day, not trying to do it all at once. But also there was some commentary around if you're like flying or something and you're limiting the amount of water that you're drinking during that time period, like it's okay. Your body will catch itself up. You just if you put yourself into a state of dehydration, that's when you have to start rebalancing. That's what they talked about with electrolytes as well. Like usually you're taking electrolytes to rebalance once you've already lost electrolytes. But if you're staying ahead of it, unless you're like out sweating a lot, doing outdoor work, or an athlete, if you're staying ahead of it, your balance of sodium and other electrolytes in your body actually like stays pretty balanced. Your body is working at keeping those balanced.
Yeah.
So it's only after you've messed up the balance that you need to replenish with
Well,
electrolytes.
and there's been a lot of talk recently. I feel like I've heard a few news stories where people have had issues where they've had too much water and it's like thrown off their chemical balance, which then causes issues. And so of like missing things that your body needs to survive.
Yeah, they actually say it's pretty hard to drink too much water.
Yes, but I think some of the pledging things that have occurred,
yeah.
like those are the stories where I have heard. And
if you're in some kind of like challenge game, like the hot dog eating contest, but for water or something like that, it's probably not good for you. But you shouldn't not drink water just regularly because you're concerned about drinking too much. You're probably never going to hit that threshold, but you also just shouldn't be guzzling gallons of it at a time. Yeah.
I took in high school like an outdoor safety learning course, something like that, and they had someone who is a hiker, like enjoys it as a hobby. That's how they spend their weekends, things like that. And he actually talked about how hydration is so important whenever you are out in the wilderness, because usually you're not checking and watching your intakes as much as when you're at home, when you have like when you're just living your daily life. And not to like be gross or vulgar or anything, but he's like the best way to do that is by keeping an eye out on what your urine looks like as you are going through your day. And if you're noticing it's getting darker, like, that you need to consume more water.
Yeah,
um
exactly. That's exactly right. I get that is a very common and good way to tell if you're hydrated well enough or not. It's like pale colored is good, and anything else is maybe not good. Um, there are like real health benefits to being hydrated, and one of them is actually cognitive function. So, if you are dehydrated, your cognitive function and ability to problem solve and reason and think quickly actually decreases. So, just like with getting, the right nutrition and protein and all those things, not having enough water, you can't think as well. And I thought about that because sometimes when I get really hyper focused in at work or really busy with a lot of back to back meetings, I'll notice that like I'm thirsty, but I don't have time to get up and go find water.
yeah.
And I didn't put a bunch of water in my office at the beginning of the day. And then, by the end of the day, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like really, really thirsty, and probably haven't been doing myself any favors because I'm not able to think as well when I don't have enough water on board. So that was really interesting. It improves your skin elasticity, which, as we get older, becomes more and more of a concern. Had everybody telling me about that when I was young, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about or why I care about this. And they told me I would care about it when I got older, and here I am caring
Here I
about it.
am, and I care, and we're having a discussion about it.
That's right. Never too early to start caring for your skin, and part of that is by hydrating.
That's right.
It actually helps you cool down when you exercise. So being hydrated while you exercise keeps you from getting overheated.
Right, because you sweat.
Yeah, yes, because you sweat. So if you're dehydrated before exercising, you are going to get more overheated, which is really interesting. I always feel like I'm overheated during exercise.
I feel like I just live right at that threshold of like, oh, I'm too hot.
I don't know if that's a hydration issue solely or if that's just a, I'm not sure. It helps prevent muscle fatigue. So, as I've, been sharing with you about my daily weight workouts and how I'm just dying, hydration helps with that. Of course, it helps balance your electrolytes, and it helps transport oxygen-rich blood and nutrients throughout your body and to your extremities. So, things I didn't have to think about when I was younger that now, as I'm officially an adult,
Just
I used to
recently an adult.
I used to ask my very good friend Jamie, I used to ask her, like, when do you think I'll start feeling like an adult? I already, like, I have a kid who's, I think at that point he was like in middle school or high school. I'm, yeah, I've got a mortgage, I've got all these things. Like, when am I going to start feeling like an adult? And I think the answer is when I start caring so much about how much water I'm
How
drinking.
much water intake you are consuming. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what I think.
All right.
So just some fun facts about water and like self-care and how to care for yourself. You'll feel better. You'll operate better. You'll live longer if you drink enough water. So plain old water is good for you, and make sure to hydrate.
Get your water bottles, fill them, and keep drinking water.
Keep drinking water.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah.
Well, now we've learned a little part of your self-care is going to be a focus on your water intake over the next, well, forever. Let's be concerned about how much water we're consuming for forever.
And now, a fun story from the editing floor.
Do you remember the Heathrow Airport experience.
Sure do. I talk to people about that frequently.
You do not.
Whenever we talk about going through like security at other countries' airports. Look, I made a fool of myself in Canada. Like I
You're like,
am.
yeah, let me tell you about when I was traveling with my friend Jen.
No, I tell them all the time. Like they have different
How
rules, and
she had
then
a meltdown and sat down after getting out of security on the ground at the airport and started crying.
I don't remember that part. Were you
Okay,
like
so
repacking your bag?
um no, I wasn't repacking my bag. I had to throw away some of
Right.
my toiletries, and I was so mad about it that like I sat down on the floor outside of security and started crying. You don't remember that?
No, I remember you
And
being
then
upset about it, but if anyone were to tell me that Jen Gear sat on a floor in an airport of all
I
places,
know
I'd just be
it's
like, I don't believe
unbelievable.
you.
And then I got up and I went took you to the sundries and things
That was
shop
so
at the
conveniently
airport.
placed,
So
right?
conveniently placed, and bought some sundries to replace what I had to throw away and expensed them.
As you should.
I was so mad that they wouldn't let me. I was like, I already made it to London with this stuff. And they were like, different rules.
So I tell people all the time, different rules. Because I
Meanwhile,
did the same thing with a backpack in Canada. I thought it didn't dawn on me that TSA is not the same everywhere.
meanwhile in Bangalore, they let me take a whole moose cake through the security, melted on my lap while on the plane
Well, why would you have even done that?
to Dubai. Got it through the security in Dubai, opened it, and I was like, this is just a puddle. It's just a puddle.
Yes,
Because
moose has to be kept cool.
the guys at here's what happened. All of the lovely, wonderful guys at the hotel in Bangalore that we stayed at, the Leela Palace, um, like made me a cake to say goodbye to me. And they brought me this cake as we were eating our like last meal before we went to the airport. But I was full. I didn't want to eat it, but I didn't want to be rude. And it was like this whole entire cake, like with my name on the top and like farewell. And so I was like, thank you. I'm like really touched that you made me a farewell cake. And they all gathered around and we took selfies together and like it was really sweet. Um, this is the first time that I went to India. It was just really, really sweet. And so I wanted to like honor their farewell gift and their, kindness and love. And so I was like, can I take it with me? Not because I needed cake on the plane. I mean, they just have so much stuff on the plane anyways, right?
Right.
Because you're flying Emirates. Uh, but because I wanted to be kind, I just didn't want to eat it then. And so I took it with me and I had to get special permission to get it through security at the airport. And I'm sure that the guys at the airport were all rolling their eyes at me, but it's the whole situation. And they put a special stamp on it and I took it on the plane and we got to Dubai. And in Dubai, you have to go through security again once you arrive from India. And so we go through the security again, and I'm just like, it just smells like rich chocolate ganache. And I open up the box, and it's just a melted. But in the Dubai airport, there's like no trash cans. It's not like a US airport. So I think, and we were there in the middle of the night. I think what I ended up doing was just leaving it on the floor in the hall because
Close enough.
I couldn't find a trash can.
All right. Well, that was a choice.
What was I going to do? Take it on the next plane with me? Like, it's not even a cake anymore. It's just a puddle. It's a
It's a
puddle in a box.
melted puddle.
It's just a puddle in a box.
Puddle in a
So
box.
it smells good.
Probably would have given you a really bad tummy ache, though.
So that's my story.
Now back to normal programming.
I think we want to talk a little bit about goal setting. So there's like personal life goal setting, and then there's like work life goal setting. And I actually, I'm a big fan of the concept of taking some time for myself personally and having like a annual business review, if you will, with myself, like an annual executive retreat for my own self-development. And just think about what it is that I want for the year and like reflect on the year prior and how have I done at meeting my goals, not because I think I need to judge myself, but because I want to make sure I'm on track.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you set goals for yourself personally or if you just set goals from a work standpoint, but we kind of want to talk about that today, right?
Yeah. I think it's that time of year where at at the beginning of the year, the very January 1st, we think about those things for ourselves. Like, what are the goals? What are the things we want to achieve this year for ourselves? But then also usually in work or at work, you have your goal setting season, which is you're aligning, your professional goals with whatever your organization goals may be, things like that. So I just thought it would be interesting for us to talk about that a little bit. And I don't think you can really talk about goal setting also without talking about those performance reviews. And a lot of people may have just finished them or may just be wrapping them up. And so I thought it would be an interesting conversation for us to have.
I hate performance review season.
At work, you don't appreciate them, not your job.
I just like hate the season in general. Like just the even though I know it's really important and it's something that can be helpful, there's just so much like anxiety and dread, I feel like, that goes along with performance reviews. So
that was a question that I wanted to ask you, because I know that as we've talked about this before, you've expressed kind of that feeling. When you think about that, like, is it rooted back in the way that it's been presented, or the way that you've is there something that has caused you to feel that way, or is it just this idea of oh my gosh, I have to pull all this information together and supposed to have a meaningful, in-depth conversation about it?
Yeah, I think one of the, I think it's a few things. So one, I think it can be really intimidating to sell yourself if you're not really comfortable doing that. And that's something that, I have tried to lean into more over the last 10 years, something I've tried to teach my team how to get more comfortable at doing.
Mm-hmm.
But the feedback that I've gotten from my different teams is that they also dread the performance review timeframe because it does feel really intimidating. Well, let's just be honest. Usually performance review season comes at a busy time of year anyways. It's like the changeover of the year and there's all these things that have to get done. And so it's usually a busy time in the business. And you have to stop and kind of articulate what are all of the things that you've accomplished over the year? Because you're basically trying to say, when you look across the organization and you rate me compared to everybody else.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that you know what value I brought to the table. But I think it's also intimidating because it can feel so personal. Somebody is placing value on you in the organization and the work that you do. And it often doesn't feel like a safe, hey, it's okay for you to be just exactly as you are. And then also let's talk about how you performed. It's how you're going to get paid is based on that number. So if the perception of how you performed is not meeting, but I think it's stressful, even if you get a great performance review. It's still stressful because it's how somebody else sees you. And it's hard not to look at that from you're assessing my value as a person. I don't think I'm alone in that. While I do think that's a very personal thing I bring to the table, I think I am not alone in that. Many people struggle with that feeling of you're placing a number on me or a value on me.
Well, and so whenever I feel the same way, I think that I used to help lead this training course, and it basically started, the course started with asking the question of the participants, I'm going to ask you this question, and I want you to write down the first feeling that you have. And so everyone gets out their pen and paper, and then you're like, okay, pretend I'm your manager. And I say, I have some feedback for you. Do you have a minute? And you ask everyone to write down their feelings. And everyone across the board, not everyone, some people are like eager,
Jeez.
excited, whatever, but the majority
No.
are like, ooh, anxious, scared. And
Panic.
so,
You go
exactly.
into adrenaline rush, like
Right.
amygdala hijack, fight or flight mode.
Right. Exactly. And so I think a lot of people, even though like you in a performance review, you're not necessarily being, asked that question, but that is ultimately what we're getting at, right? Like we are talking about feedback. We're talking about things that I don't know, like is this just your opinion? Is this opinions of others? So
Well, I think too, you like work so hard and you bring so much of yourself to work. I mean, not everyone, but a lot of people. Work is I think culturally here in the US, especially, and I don't think this is, you know, um, just the US culture, but I think speaking about the US culture specifically, we are in a place where we really identify with our career and our success in our career, and it kind of defines you as an adult. And so you stake a lot on how you're perceived at work, and so this performance review conversation is like somebody else having control over the official value in the system that then is discussed or not discussed in calibration meetings that you're not in, about how valuable you are to the organization. And that I think vulnerable is definitely the word for me. These performance conversations end up just making me feel really vulnerable. Not because I haven't had great leaders who, are like a trust and have great conversation, but it's just you're entering this conversation going, wow, somebody else is in charge of writing down and putting into the system how I'm perceived. And
yeah,
I care very much about that.
right. Well, I mean, and like you said, it's a lot of times in a lot of organizations, it is tied to your annual increase, to a bonus. Like usually there are other factors that also impact you in your day-to-day life and your success in your personal life as well. So after you had said that, I started looking into like performance reviews, like what do we know about them? Like I think everyone knows that they're not everyone's most favorite time of the year. Turns out I found that was true.
Really? What did it say? What does the research say?
There were several articles that talk about how it's a very personal experience, and they track back to World War I and World War II and can talk about how their systems and their ratings and things like that were used, and then how they made their ways into
in the war,
the rankings. So in establishing who was being sent where to perform what job, there were forced ranking methods involved, and so those things kind of bled out into the private sector, and those things started to be adopted. So then they looked at this research from, I think, 1940s to 2016, I think, is whenever the study stopped. And it I think the surprising thing to me was that it's the same conversation that is being had back then that we're having now, and it's just like this cycle that we're all on. Which then led me to, well, if this has been an ongoing conversation for so long, then like how have companies done this in a way that have made them successful and meaningful, purposeful, and make their employees maybe not look forward to it, but have a little bit more comfort? And so a lot of organizations have actually moved away from formal review processes and moved into more frequent conversations in making sure that the conversations continue, that it's not just once or twice a year that we're talking about your
like
contributions,
feedback.
Right? Exactly.
What's your take on that? And are you talking about scenarios where you still get a rating?
No. from the article that I was reading from HBR, and we can add links and such. It's talking about the conversations not having a forced rank involved in it, that it is a conversation, and maybe the ranking only happens once a year.
Yeah. So what's your take on that?
I personally prefer that method. Like, I prefer the frequent check-ins, knowing. I also think that the way that people manage has changed a lot throughout history, and they do talk about that in the article, of how organizations have either gotten deeper or flatter, and which has its pros and cons. I prefer it because I think it's less of a surprise, and nobody
wants to be surprised in that conversation.
No bad surprises. Exactly. Yeah. So I personally like it. I like more of that method of frequent conversations, but I still, it's the structure around it that I think I still struggle with. Like,
yeah, I agree, because I've been in organizations where they did move away from the ranking and the rating. And I think what's tough about that is there is still behind the scenes some
conversations,
ordering that happens, because if you're a pay for performance organization, like most corporate America is, you have to have some way to figure out how you're going to differentiate pay. And while I love the concept and the idea of moving away from the rating, then it almost feels like it's less transparent about where you stand. And it kind of puts to the forefront this feeling of, well, it's more about politics. It's who had the project, who, had the most visibility. It's who likes who the most. And I mean, let's just be honest, ratings or no ratings, like sometimes those things do come into play from a visibility standpoint. I will say I was in an organization that had moved to a forced ranking, where they did kind of a ranking of top 20%, middle 70%, bottom 10%, and everyone had to fall in. Like, it had to be that percentage. And those were tough conversations to have, because especially when you're in a high performance organization that's very driven, to hear that you're like the middle 70%, which is the majority of people, was really hard. That was a hard message to have to deliver to people, because they care very much. So it's just interesting culturally, and I get it. I get the concept behind why we go through performance feedback season. I think it's really important to be transparent with people in how they're doing. I think it's really important to, if you are a pay for performance organization, be really clear about, how you're differentiating pay. But I just don't know what the answer is on how to make it feel less, personal.
Right. So I agree. And I came across another HBR article called Performance Reviews That Actually Motivate Employees.
HBR is Harvard Business Review, for those of you who aren't as elite as Chris. You haven't acronymed it yet.
It's true. Apologies. But I do. The thing that I appreciated about this review was that it talks about the importance of goal setting and aligning on what the goals are, so that way the individual and the manager are able to move throughout the period, understanding what we're trying to achieve, where you need help, and what does that help look like for you. And it's really written more in a way of like how to make this work for the employee, by understanding what their needs are, what motivates them, and how you show up for them. And it goes even further to say, like, it's not just about like that once or twice a year conversation or whatever formal schedule your organization has chosen, but it's like this ongoing partnership, understanding, whatever you want to call it, that you and the manager work on for you to be successful. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was, to me, more employee focus versus organizational force ranking, things like that, which I think are hard. And that is not to say that there are not organizations where that is necessary because you're big, you're growing. I think it also is very personal to that organization and what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. As we kind of set ourselves up to talk about this topic, and as we're talking about it, one of the things that just comes to my mind, keeps coming back to my mind, is what we do have control over is the headspace that we are in when we move into these conversations. And so just doing the work to try and remind yourself, like, this is somebody else's perception. And as I'm articulating, like, what it is that I've done for the year and how would I rate my performance, like, it's just one facet of life.
Yeah.
And it's just people's perception. So if you don't allow it to become an evaluation of yourself, which is easier said than done, but like, you actually have control over that. So just getting yourself into that mindset where you remind yourself that. And if you're a leader of people, like, just knowing that, not everybody, but a lot of people struggle with this. And so as you go through the conversation, just making space for that and making sure to remind people, like, look, this isn't a evaluation of you as a person or how valuable you are. This is just like the work that you've done this year and how this fits into the broader picture of the organization. And kind of that self-distancing that we've talked about a little bit in the past, like distancing your own value as a human from, your career at work and what you're doing at work. And it doesn't mean that that doesn't matter or that you are less motivated or that you care less about the results that you deliver, but just you have the ability to choose how you want to define yourself.
Yeah. And I think maybe a topic for a future conversation, I also think the generations coming into the workforce now are also changing, are I don't want to say forcing change, but are influencing change in the way that these conversations are being had. And I think for organizations to continue to be successful, they have to figure out how to, engage these people, make them feel like there's a place for them, and, meet people where they're at. And
yeah. And I think corporations have become like this entity that feels like an authority figure. And so if you're a part of, management, having a management conversation, it feels like an authority figure.
Yeah.
And I think, like, generationally, that's just something that lands very different in society today. Because if you think about the evolution of corporations over time, it's not common anymore. It's not as common anymore for somebody to graduate from college and go work for a company and retire from that company, where that used to be, very common and super valued. And, now it's much more common that you see somebody that's been, 3 to 5 years one place and, kind of, then it's like, why aren't you moving on if you haven't been there 3 to 5 years? Which my personal opinion on is you should just do what makes you happy. If it's being at that company that you've been at for 15 years, great. And if it's finding something new, also great. You shouldn't be running away from something, because if you're running away, then you'll often run right back into that situation. But I think starting a new job is very stressful. So, I think sticking at a company for a while probably reduces stress in most cases too. But, we view the corporate entity differently now than it was viewed, 30 years ago.
Right. It's very true. And I think that is potentially why these conversations have kind of fell into a cycle of, like, we're trying to solve problems using methods that are known to us versus trying to forge a different path and figure out, like, what is the best way. Because one way of having these conversations or conducting these types of things may work very different in a medical institute versus how it will in a technology company. Like it, you have different people who are facilitating different things, and which ultimately means you probably also need to show up differently for them to help support
Yeah.
them and be successful in their careers.
So if I'm getting ready to go have my own performance review, what advice do you offer to help ensure that I can go in, represent myself well, and feel good about the conversation when I come out of it?
Well, I highly recommend that people think beyond the immediate past, because it's very easy to think about the things that I recently did and want to just talk about those. But I always encourage people to think of it as like storytelling. So start at the beginning and work your way through. Look at your calendars, look at your emails, look at, all the things you've done throughout the year in any capacity that you can, and try to find that through line and hit on those things.
And if I did a lot of stuff, should I talk about all of it?
I mean, I think you throw in as much as you can, and I don't think you have to talk about all of it. But I think what are the common themes in those projects that you've completed? Because that's showing your strengths. That's showing where you can, like, where your abilities have been used and you've consistently delivered.
Yeah, I love that. I love that comment. I think one of the things that I was taught early on is to tie back, not to talk about the amount of things you've done, but to tie back to what have you delivered? Like, why does it matter? And so
but
thinking through,
how do you show how you delivered if you're not talking about the things that you delivered?
no. Not to focus the conversation on the quantity of things that you've done, but instead to talk about like, what are the results that you've delivered? So instead of going and looking at, well, I worked on this project and I worked on that project and I worked on this project, instead think, here's what I delivered for the organization. And also sometimes to acknowledge, like, I did a bunch of work and we scrapped like the project and pivoted and moved to something else.
Yeah.
But like, here's what that supported during that time, or here's what we learned from that, or you just said, focus on the results. So instead of focusing on activities, focus on outcomes.
Yeah. And then I would encourage people to now, like in this next part of the year, really focus on that goal setting. Like because I think like that's where you put the car on the road to success. And like truly understanding what you need from your manager, and where you start, that may be different than what it turns out to be as the year goes on. But yeah. I just think if you're all speaking from the same point of view, with the same understanding, like it makes that ongoing conversation happen, versus those surprises that may pop up throughout the year that, cause us all to feel stressed, anxious, and I don't have a minute to talk.
Well, what I love about writing down your goals and getting super aligned on goals is that it gives you the power to renegotiate, so that as priorities change, as the business pivots, as, a pandemic happens and changes what you're going to focus on, an integration comes up, an acquisition, like all of those major things that could throw a wrench in your plan. The business all of a sudden pivots to deliver a new offering. They want to start up in a new country overnight, all those things that you and I have experienced throughout our career together. Having your goals clearly written down from the beginning, and then understanding how things need to pivot and what goals then need to be deprioritized, you can go back and have a conversation and realign, to say, okay, I can't focus on all of these things and these new things. So I assume, my assessment is these two things have to come off the table in order for me to pivot. And that makes sense because they are the least important when you look at the new list. But is that how you see things? And then let's talk about how to take them off the table. Like, is it okay just to push them out? Do we need to find somebody else? If the answer is just no, you have to do it all. Like, I think you have to be able to articulate what's realistic, and that's like an estimation skill that many people just aren't very good at. But I have found that to be a really helpful tool to just pragmatically say, okay, we all know that no one can do everything. So given the new priority, here's what I think needs to be deprioritized. Do you agree? And typically the response to that conversation is either yes or no, let's talk about some of these others and figure out, because I think there may be a different home for them.
Yeah. That brings up a really interesting point, and something that I've heard lots of conversations around. Like, who's in charge of having that conversation? Like, is that you, the employee, who should be going to your manager, or is that 100%. Your manager saying, let's check in?
No. So I had a coach who once said to me, Jen, as long as you are getting the things done to make your leader look good, they are never going to ask you to stop. So if you have too much on your plate, you're the one that has to renegotiate that. If you are finding yourself drowning in individual contributor tasks to be able to deliver for the business because you're not resourced appropriately, either you don't have the right skill sets available or you're not staffed correctly, then your leader is never going to come and tell you, rarely, shouldn't say never, but rarely is your leader going to come and tell you, hey, you should stop doing what you're doing that's making me look good. Like, you should stop doing what you're doing that's solving my problems and start focusing on other stuff. And so you kind of box yourself in. So I do think that it is you that has the accountability to go renegotiate, because I tell my team this too. And I try to make it really safe for them to do this, but I'll tell them, like, guys, if I'm asking you to do something and you tell me, sure, okay, I'm assuming you have the capacity. So if you don't, if you're feeling overwhelmed, I'm not just going to know that. You have to tell me. Because I used to think, well, if they're asking me to do it, then there's nobody else to do it. So I just have to get it done. And then, I would take it all on until, I broke. And then it was already too late to fix. And, my boss is like, I had no idea how terrible this was. I feel bad, but also I don't feel accountable for the fact that you broke because you didn't raise your hand. And, I just was trying to be a good corporate citizen and do what I thought I was supposed to do. I didn't know any better, right? So I think that's just, breakdown in communication. But I love that you asked the question, because I think it's natural for people to think, well, I'm supposed to do what I'm told. And so if I'm being told to do this, I got to do it.
Yeah, I agree with your answer 1,000%. I think where it gets a little bit into a gray area is with more junior entry level people who just don't have that muscle built yet. Yeah. But I think in your answer, you said it really well, where you're checking in with your team. You're telling them, like, if this is not something that you think you can achieve, tell me. Like, let's figure out how we have that conversation, creating that space.
Yeah.
And then it's up to them to engage in the conversation. So I just think, like, they're as easy as I want to say, yes, it's the employee's responsibility. I do think there are some people who just don't know because you haven't done it yet. Like, you're still learning.
It's a partnership. And I do think, there are some teams that I've managed where the work that they do, it's just really common for them to kind of get overwhelmed before they realize that they're overwhelmed and not know how to get themselves out of it. And one of the skills that I feel like I have had to, just teach a lot, because it's really common for people in this role to, be really devoted to getting the work done, but not know that they're in over their head before it happens. And so that's one of the skills that I feel like I have focused on a lot with that particular role, is like, let's just learn how to do this. This is a muscle to build. And I think even just starting with giving them permission, like, it's my job as a leader to give them permission, not because they need my permission, like from my mind, but oftentimes I find that I'm waiting for permission to do things I didn't know I was waiting for permission to do. Like, and to your point, you don't always recognize that. Like, you don't realize that you are waiting for permission to raise your hand and say, I have too much on my plate. And yet, if you were given that permission, you would have raised your hand
Right.
and said there was too much on your plate. And so I think it's making it safe. It's that partnership of making it safe to have the two-way conversation. And I do think that that is the responsibility of the leader, just because there's positional power involved there, as even if that power isn't wielded, in a way that's like, hey, here's the hierarchical power, it still exists. And so
it's an assumed differential.
yeah. So I think we have to acknowledge that as leaders and go out of our way to articulate what our expectations are. And my expectation is never that somebody like become magical and bend space and time to get everything done that's not possible. My expectation is that, like, if they're overwhelmed, they speak up and ask for help and try and come with solutions. But if they don't have any, like, tell me that and let's problem solve. And if it really is a matter of, hey, like, I still expect you to be able to get all this work done, then let's talk about what it is that's preventing you from being able to meet that. Like, is there something else that you're doing that I don't know about? Is there some way to make this faster? Are you filling out like triplicate forms and filing them? And I remember at a company that we worked at, there was this like process that we had to go through. And before I had arrived at the company, they had moved on to a new system, but they had never done away with the manual process that had to happen in order to complete the transaction. And so the new system replaced the need for the old, but no one ever talked about that. And so my assumption was just like this manual process wasn't even happening because, it's all in this new system now. And when I really started digging in with like, what is it that's taking so long? Like, why is this such a thing that takes so long? And then understanding all of the like, oh, we still go through the same old manual process that we used to go through before we had the system in place.
Yeah.
And it was like, how do you untangle that? Because like, we can't keep doing the old and add the new. That makes it less efficient. So I think I do think it's important to go in curious always, but to be able to have the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I'll share my final thoughts, and then I'm interested to hear yours. I think when it comes to this conversation around performance reviews, performance conversations, goal setting, I think having read the things that I have now, also with my lived experiences, I feel like really anchoring in starting from a place of understanding with my supervisor, with my teammates, and then moving forward and understanding like how frequently are we checking in on this, how are we having the conversations, how are we tracking. It's really important so everyone understands what the expectation is, there's no surprises, but also continues to open up that space for the conversation to be ongoing, so that way as the organization its needs may shift, we're able to evaluate those on a common timeline.
Yeah, I think that's great. I would say my final thoughts are like, focus on articulating outcomes. And if you don't know the purpose behind why you're doing what you do or what you spend most of your time on, get more curious and ask those questions. But as you talk about like your performance for the year, don't focus on quantity of tasks, focus on outcome of what's been delivered, focus on like solutions or evolution. Don't sell yourself short if, you got 90% of the way somewhere and it was just harder than expected. I think you have the ability to tell the story, so don't sell yourself short. I think, the other thing is just if you go into that conversation in that kind of vulnerable place of somebody else is placing an assessment on me, do the mental work ahead of time of reminding yourself that only you get to choose your value. And while you want to be open to feedback because it just helps you, even if you have a really supportive leader or if you have one who's maybe not so supportive, like you're the one that gets to choose whether or not to take their feedback, and place value on yourself because of it. You also get to choose whether or not you agree with the feedback. And I know that's really a lot easier said than done, which is why you have to do the mental work ahead of time. But I think if you make it smaller in your mind, then the conversation's less intimidating, and you kind of rebalance the sort of proverbial power balance, imbalance that happens when you walk into those conversations.
Great recap. Love that.
Yeah. So we would love to hear your thoughts, opinions, and experiences. Like, how do you feel about performance reviews, whether you're giving them or when you're on the receiving end of those? Do you absolutely love them and live for that time of year? Is it an annoying task? Do you feel vulnerable in those conversations like we've been talking about? What are some of the tips and tricks that you have learned along the way? And if you happen to have a really good story, entertaining story, we'd love to hear that too. So email us, call us, text us. We'd love to hear more from you guys.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks for listening in on this episode. Jen, thanks for the robust conversation around water.
Yeah, drink water.
I definitely am going to go fill up my cup and focus on that today.
Drink water. And if you want more tips about how to stay healthy and both mentally and physically, subscribe, follow us, and keep checking us out. We love to have you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.